Greetings and salutations, Afrolytes. It is I, AfroMandias, back with another video today. First off, I want to apologize for the outfit. I know, this is kind of out there when it comes to all my other shirts I've worn in the past, with my other couple of videos, but I just got done working out and, just kind of recovering and kind of getting myself back on my feet and, just got back in from another nice little run as well. So, kind of out of breath, but wanted to put together a video before I started off my day. So other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed a little gun show I got going on. Oh, look at that. Oh yeah, Alexander's in the gym. Big Daddy Smith, oh, getting those gains. Anywho, so with all that being said, mind the attire that I'm wearing, but I just wanted to post a video today going over not another champion. I know you guys must be shaking in your boots, but no, it's not going to be another creating a champions video. I'm still kind of holding off on that because, again, I want to try to, try to vary my content and try to make it a little more different than just have it say like created champions for the past like 10 videos and whatnot. So, I'm doing well so far. I've already gone over my two other universes, kind of going over the Audacity universe and the Dynamite universe. So if you have any interest in that, check out those two videos below. But in this video is actually going to be a really unique and special one because we're not really going to be going over, I guess technically we are going to be going over different types of characters that are going to be present in the story, but it's not going to be focused entirely on them. In fact, it's just going to be focused on like the higher powers of this, of the universe that I am laid out in front of you guys. So, you guys must be wondering, oh, Afro, what do you mean by higher power? I mean, in a sense, gods, deities, avatars and stuff like that. That's what I'm going to be going over in this video today. It's, some a little more out of the ordinary, and to be honest with you, I was kind of stuck with a couple of ideas that were in the back of my mind, like like I was gonna, if I had to do, not had, but if I were to do another creating a champions video, I didn't know if I wanted to do it on another, or if I had to do another creating champions video or building a bastard video, I didn't know if I wanted to do that or if I wanted to kind of go over a little more about my other universes. Because, for right now, I have it structured to where it's like focusing on legend, then I'll go to chronicle, then I'll go to DAD. Anywho, I'm getting off topic. Basically, I'm going to be focusing on the gods and the different types of deities that are present in my universe, right? So, when I say gods, I specifically mean at least in the other universes, not really in Chronicle, Legend, and DAD, because they all share one god, or in this case, Gad. Gad, G-A-D, G, whatever that little like dot is, like it's an acronym, right? Basically it's GAD, or the greatest among deities, or GAD, right? So with Gad, he's basically my universe's version of God, and he's basically the creator of the universe. That whole Big Bang shebang kind of deal, that was all of his doing. And basically that's kind of what led up to, how the, planets got formed in the universe and galaxies, blah, blah, blah. Everything that you think that, everything that you believe and think that God did, Gad did as well. So, in my universe, technically it's not it's not like our universe. It's kind of slightly different in a way where it's just similar enough to where it's still kind of different. But yes, Gad is, the one above all, the top dog, the head, the HNIC, I will say. If you know. But basically, he, is kind of the, the Lord, and he is God and whatnot, right? So, and with that being him being Gad, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to gather my words because I did just get back from a workout and I'm trying to like reconfigure myself. But basically with God, he has to have his angels and whatnot, right? So I kind of mentioned this back in my DAD video. I didn't really go over it, but I just kind of like glossed over the fact that Gad and his makers exist. But with Gad, he has his own angels known as makers. Makers are basically, as I mentioned at least 3 times already, they are my version of angels. So, how I prefer, archangel, Archangel, Archangel Michael, it's Saint Maker Michael. So all the angels that you read and know in the Bible and whatnot, Gabriel, Zagaziel, Camiel, all those angels are present in being makers in my universe and whatnot. Obviously, the strongest of all of them is being Saint Angel Michael. He's the next. He is he's the one to blow the trumpet when heaven rains down upon in basically to fight all evil. So that's the job of Saint Michael, Saint Maker Michael. Basically, he's the one to blow the trumpet when all out war is going to happen, right? So that won't be until like much later on down the road, but just know that it's going to be Michael who's going to lead the charge with all the other makers. And who knows, maybe he'll have to battle all the other DAD Legend and Chronicle characters, and they'll have the feat underneath their belt that they said they could put on their little resume. It's like, all right, so you were the world president, you were also a prince of the Xerxians, and you fought an angel. So it'll be a nice little couple of like things they could add to the resume. And who knows, whenever Death Battle makes a Death Battle my characters, which God, I hope not. I with all the credit I'm willing to give to them, they are just terrible when it comes to analysis and whatnot. I will never ever forgive them for the Omni-Man and Bardock Death Battle. That was a load of hoo-ha. Anywho, I'm getting off topic, but basically, the strongest of all the makers is Saint Maker Michael. And obviously you have Saint Maker Gabriel, Saint Maker Zagazel, Saint Maker Camiel. Saint Maker Gabriel is also the messenger of the angels, so any like reportings of wrongdoings and whatnot is reported back to him and whatnot. So that's kind of what I have. I'm still kind of writing it out and trying to figure out like how to structure these characters to where, they fit in the story and also in the bigger scheme of the universe as well. But with angels also comes with fallen angels, or fallen makers and whatnot, right? And one of these fallen makers was a female maker known as Lucille. And Lucille basically challenged against Gad because she believed that she could run the universe better than he can, and she believed that the universe should be taken by power and not by sincerity and grace. That's the difference between Gad and Lucille, is that Lucille was definitely a lot more like power hungry and whatnot, and wanted to like take everything by force and wanted to establish dominance across the universe and whatnot. So, with that being said, obviously she wanted to challenge Gad, and if you obviously see the parallels, this is my version of Lucifer. Lucifer, obviously being the most beautiful angel amongst all of God's angels, was very prideful and very egotistical and wanted to challenge God. But he couldn't even get past Archangel Michael and was thrown out of heaven. So that happened in my story, is that she tried to, not to say assassinate God, but she definitely tried to, buck up to him and try to like step towards him and try to like challenge his grace. And then, when it was all said and done, she was basically thrown out of, heaven by Saint Maker Michael. And so with her falling out of heaven, along with her followers, yes, she did have followers. You could call it simps, you could call it followers, it doesn't really matter. But they were all also the angels who tried to step towards God, but they were also thrown out of heaven. I don't really have the names of these stars yet, but basically it kind of, with them being thrown out of heaven, they, became fallen makers. Or in this case, with Lucille Morning Star, they all became, say it with me now, stars. That's right. You got it. So basically, all the fallen makers or fallen angels all became demons or stars. I already mentioned this back in my like DAD video, so I'm not really going to preface this and kind of go over like all the other like stars I mentioned in there, but I'm just going to go over and kind of gloss over like what are the main stars that are going to be like focused on in these universes and whatnot, right? Sorry. Mouth gets dry very easily. I'm a very thirsty boy. Anywho, so let's kind of go over the main three stars that are going to be present in the DAD universe. I've already kind of mentioned this in my DAD video, but I'm just going to gloss over it here. These three, Balrog, Lyra, and Samael, are known as the three judges. Obviously, with them, they're not really kings, but they are judges, and basically their job is to judge to see if someone is worthy of being a star and whatnot, right? So yes, in my universe, you can become a star and whatnot, and it has to be a 2-to-1. It all has to be balanced out if you can make three balanced. But basically, if all three agree, then hoorah, good on you for becoming a star. But if only one agrees, you're basically screwed. When you try to become a star, you have to give up absolutely everything in your possessions. So that means your love, your family, your earthly belongings, everything, your soul, right? So basically, when you want to become a star, you have to prove your worth and have to give up everything, absolutely everything, to become a star. But if there's still some sort of modicum of love or any sort of thing in your heart, they will deem you unworthy. So for all those people who, as the saying goes, the worst kind of man you can meet in this world is a man with nothing to lose. You know what I'm saying? So, because with that man, he could become a star and whatnot, right? So, with those three judges becoming, sentencing you to become a star, or if they don't see you worthy, you basically lose everything and become a husk. You become a wandering husk, and you go to, at least in the DAD universe, on planet Gaia. That's where, Doghead and Abigail and the Leatherbacks and whatnot, I'm going to get to them when I get to them in this video. But basically, you wander into a forest with other failed, people who wanted to become a star, and you turn into a tree and whatnot, right? You become a lich tree, and that's kind of where you remain for the rest of your days and whatnot, right? So that's kind of the three judges, but there are also other stars that are going to be present in my story. Not in the DAD. Well, there are also going to be other stars in the DAD universe, but I'm still kind of coming up with them and figuring out their names and whatnot. Who knows? I may make a part 2 of this video, kind of going over what the other stars are going to be present in the Extreme Days saga. So that's another thing I'll mention, is that the Extreme Days is basically something that happens every other millennium. I think millennium is 1,000 years, right? Basically, it happens every 1,000 years, where the stars are basically let loose and they just wreak havoc. And that's why it's called the Extreme Days and whatnot, right? So, that's, with the stars being basically forces of nature who are nigh invulnerable and are very powerful. It's a very scary thought that every 1,000 years, you, whether you're alive or you're dead, and you have to fear that your children are probably going to have to go through it. It's just the idea of basically these forces of nature being let loose to do whatever they will please and whatnot. And you guys must be thinking to yourselves, oh, why is it every 1,000 years to where, these creatures are let loose? And it's by the Millennium Countdown. And the Millennium Countdown is basically the only time where Lucille Morningstar has enough power to kind of rip a rift, because she's basically, when she was shunned out of heaven, she was put a lock on her. I'm still kind of writing it out, but basically every few millennia, the lock tends to loosen, and that's what kind of causes chaos throughout the universe and whatnot, right? So anywho, basically with Lucille, this also kind of helps out balance out the universe, because if there is not enough evil and there's too much good, obviously you could look at it as being well, why wouldn't you want to have good in the universe? There has to be a balance. So that's why every 1,000 years the lock seems to loosen, and that's what causes her to allow her to release the stars and whatnot. But when the Extreme Days are up, all the stars are forced back into this rift, and whatever stars make it, and whatever stars don't, die, right? So the makers will ensure that there is no star influence when the Extreme Days are up, or if someone is powerful enough to fight against a star. I'm gonna get to that in this video as well. But yes, that's kind of what causes the Extreme Days and kind of what leads up to it and whatnot, right? So anywho, that's kind of the idea that I have for the DAD, is that at least for the three judges and the other stars that are going to be present in the story, I've already kind of mentioned this in my DAD video. That's why I'm kind of loosely going over this. I'm not really going to go in depth because if you want to know more, check out that video. Um, Anywho, so let's go over the stars that are going to be present in the Chronicle and the Legend universe. So let's go over Chronicle right quick. In the Chronicle universe, I'm going to, I've already kind of mentioned this, but basically there's going to come a certain point in time where the extreme days is going to happen for the, Chronicle heroes and whatnot, right? I'm not going to go over too much because one, I have some ideas I'm still kind of writing out, and two, it's still kind of bumpy in how I'm going to execute this, but I have a foundation about what the main characters are going to be and obviously what the stakes are going to be and whatnot. So in this story, they fight against the Sentinels. The Sentinels are, basically the version of the stars that are going to be present in the DAD universe, but are also here. The Sentinels are basically, like, if I had to describe the hierarchy in this, when it comes to the stars, is just think of it as like different gangs and whatnot, or like different cliques. Like, Balrog has his clique, and then with the Sentinels, I thought I had the name for the leader, but I do not, but we'll just call him Z. Why not? So Z basically has his clique. That's not the official name, but just, Z has his clique with the Centennials and blah, blah, blah. So, with the Centennials, they basically kind of go to Earth and they kind of wreak havoc, and obviously the Chronicle heroes have to step up. Again, I'm still kind of writing it out and trying to see, like, how it's going to go, but I kind of mentioned little tidbits about that story in Alva's video, kind of going over how she was fighting a star, and, Himawari also fights a star, Jack fights a star, the Jailbirds fight a star and whatnot. So that's them in that universe. And in the Legend universe, funnily enough, there's not really a lot of star presence that is in the Legend universe. Not to say that there isn't any, but they're, like, when it comes to DAD and Chronicle, it's very few and far between. In fact, the star that we, encounter in this story is actually a character that I've already mentioned in one of my past videos. That's right, Junito. Junito has a star inside of him. Pause. But yes, basically in the story, Junito kind of has not an identity crisis, but very much like he feels this like angry surge in his body, and it turns out to be a star, and he has to fight that and whatnot, right? So basically all the main characters that and I've already made videos about are going to be fighting stars and whatnot in the near future. So that's kind of what I have. And there's also some other like miscellaneous stars I have in the back of my head that I don't know how or where I'm going to put in the story, but I'm just going to mention it here. There's a star known as the Centennial. Now, the Centennial is basically not just one star, not just 5 stars, not even just 20 stars, 100 stars. Basically, when, Lucille was tossed out of heaven, and, some of her angels were also taught out there, not all of the makers were formed into one star, but basically a group of makers were formed into one giant planet-like star, and that was known as the Centennial. The Centennial, obviously, meaning 100, it's made up of 100 fallen makers. That is a terrifying thought. And also with the Centennial, its job is basically to produce more stars, and that happens every 100 years. It produces a seedling, or the Quaifloth seed, and that's, as I mentioned back in my DAD video with Delilah, she wants to use the seed to basically plant into the ground to, grow a Quaifloth tree. And with the Quaifloth tree, you can get yourself and your lover/lovers, how many ever, people you wanted to do. You basically sacrifice your body to the tree and your lover's bodies to the tree, and you become one with the tree. And basically with that tree, there's like how am I trying to say this? There's like seeds that pop out eggs, and those eggs become your seedlings/children and whatnot. It's weird, and it sounds so weird, but it's going to make sense when I draw it out. Just know that the Centennial produces the Quaifloth seeds, and the Quaifloth seeds are made to produce more offspring and whatnot, more than your body, is able to produce. So bada boom, bada bing, that's another star that's going to be present in the story, but isn't going to really be there. Just know that there's a planet-sized star out there. So, sleep well with that information and whatnot, right? So trying to think about if there's any other like stars and whatnot that I have. Like obviously, when it's all said and done, I have a bunch of other star ideas in the back of my head to try to figure out to see like, obviously, with the DAD characters, they're gonna be like there's gonna be a whole battle royale with them fighting different stars and whatnot. It's gonna be a big WrestleMania event, when it's all said and done. But I'm still kind of writing it out, and that's kind of what I have, I guess, when it comes to stars anyway. So, let's kind of take a step back, all right? Okay, Afro, you kind of just basically established that these stars are forces of nature who have the ability to just snap their fingers and the entire universe just goes away, right? That's not something you can just sneeze at and be like, yeah, I can take them in a fight. That's not something you can just do that. So how are our lovely, beautiful, amazing, gorgeous, most wonderful baby heroes, how are they going to even step towards a star? Now to that I say, friends, have you ever heard the tale of Cindy? Hey, Cindy. Have you ever heard the tale of the Cinderella Man? Ah, think there's the jar of Afro mentioning Cinderella Man. So yes, as I mentioned before, the Cinderella Man was, King Null, obviously Farmer Planet, family friends planet dies, and then he was struck by a red lightning bolt. Thus, he turns himself into the Cinderella Man. So basically, when it's all said and done, as I mentioned back, I don't remember, I probably mentioned this back in either my Cinderella Man video or my DAD video, but a Cinderella spark is basically the soul of a star. And so, think of that what you will, that's a lot of energy. That's a lot of energy surging through an individual and whatnot, right? So, there's also that. And also, you also have a star shard, which are the bone fragments of a dead star. So I've already mentioned that back in my Bolt video. I'm not going to preface this here, but yes, you have ways to fight against a star. The rules apply that it takes a star to fight a star. Now, not to say again, Cinderellas are technically stars, yes, but they're not stars by name, if that makes any sense. But another thing again is that you can yourself also become a Cinderella. Obviously with Cinderella Man, he was struck by, a lightning bolt, but also if you have enough, enough willpower and enough determination and just enough vigor and resolve in yourself to just keep fighting, you also yourself can become a Cinderella. It's not as powerful as say the red lightning bolt striking you, but very much you are a lot more stronger to at least go up against a star and whatnot, right? So, you can do that. And also you have the star shards. If you're worthy of the star shard, blah, 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 you become a pseudo star. So, all those reign underneath the tags of pseudo-star, star shard inflicted, Cinderella spark, Cinderella becoming. I don't know what you would call it, transforming into a Cinderella, right? So those are known as pseudo-stars or false stars. But also I've, mentioned this in my Instagram post before with Ashley and Evelyn. They have a pseudo-star form, but it's not the same as these pseudo-star forms. It's basically their first form of a star. I'm getting off topic. Anywho, that's how you can fight against a star, is by becoming a star. So that's it's basically letting your inner demons out and just saying, what, screw it. Let's throw some hands and whatnot, right? It's your adrenaline rush. It's your second win, as you can say. So, again, if you have enough will, resolve, determination, you can become, a star and whatnot, right? I'm trying to think about what else I can mention in this video. I guess, we'll kind of go over the beings that aren't necessarily gods in a technical sense. As I mentioned this before in my Dynamite video, there's not necessarily a singular god, but there are gods. They're not called gods, but they are called avatars. Avatars basically make up any sort of menial thing. You have the avatar of lightning, you have the avatar of the earth, you have avatar of the northern wind, the south wind, the northeast, west, diagonally win. You have a bunch of avatars that make up, what goes on in the ecosystem. So, not to say that, not to say that in this universe there's not a thing as God, but in this universe it's not really monotheistic, it's polytheistic. There's very much, they don't go by God, but they go by, avatars. That's kind of my way to express it and whatnot, right? So again, I'm still kind of writing that out and trying to see and figure out how I can maneuver a way around that, but just know that there are multiple gods in the Dynamite universe, but they're not called gods, they are called avatars. In the Audacity universe, there is technically Gad himself, but again, I'm not gonna go over like who Gad is. I've already mentioned him. So Gad is also present in the Audacity universe. Anything that has to do with my universe, just think of Gad basically being the one above all. And how to power scale these characters. Basically, Gad, greatest among deities. What else you expect, right? He sits at the very top. Then next you have the makers, and then next you have the fallen stars / makers. Another thing I will say is that the stars basically, some stars are stronger than makers, some makers are stronger than stars, but for the most part, it's going to be like if you had to put it in a 10 out of like out of a match of 10, like at least 7 times out of 10, the makers are going to win, right? So, they are just that strong. But, ow, sorry, I just hit my elbow, ow. Anywho, with that being said, the makers also created another being known as the Leatherbacks. The Leatherbacks are basically the protectors of mankind. And I'm not really going to go over this because I already mentioned this back in my DAD video, so go ahead and check that video out. But basically, they were made as basically fragments of makers and whatnot, right? So they're not just regular humans who have the ability to like using magic and whatnot, but they are actually like, well, they are like from the fragments of a maker and whatnot. They are part maker. It's like a 0.0000001% maker, but still, nevertheless, they are part maker and whatnot, right? And out of all the creatures that have a like chance of becoming a maker, not to say that, just as you can become a star, you can also become a maker. I'm going to go over that in my part 2 video because I have no idea how you would become a maker, because it was easier to become a star because you give in to your deepest desires and evils and whatnot rather than a maker. So, basically I'm going to put that in my part 2 to figure out like how to become a maker. But yes, you can also become a maker. For out of all the creatures I will say that are the easiest to become makers, Leatherbacks are probably like up there because they are part maker, so they would have the easiest access to become said maker and whatnot, right? And even in some of the stories, one of the like Leatherbacks does become a maker, but I'm not gonna spoil that here. That will come later on in the story and whatnot, right? So just know that the Leatherbacks were made to protect mankind against the forces of the stars, gargoyles, and Nephilim. And obviously with the, mentioning of gargoyles and Nephilim, they were also created by the stars and whatnot, right? So, they were made to basically become the predators of mankind and, kind of go off and just, devour them and whatnot, because stars hated mankind because mankind represents the good and virtue of Gad. So blah, blah, blah. The stars hate Gad. So, that's all you really need to know. But obviously with, how they are power scaled, them Leatherbacks are actually at the same level as stars because, them being part makers and whatnot, they are able to tap into that and basically fight on par with stars and whatnot, right? So that's kind of how I would power scale them. And then you have the avatars, which are underneath all of them. So again, it ranges from like what kind of star you are, what kind of avatar you are, and what kind of maker you are, blah, blah, blah. But basically, makers, stars / Leatherbacks, avatars, Gad sits at the very top. So that's kind of how I would like put them in the hierarchy and whatnot. And that's kind of, what I have for gods and whatnot. So again, not that long of a video today. I kind of want to just make a nice little side, not side piece. Because, anywho, wanted to make a nice little side video kind of talking about the other gods and like different types of creatures that are present in my universe and whatnot. And, you know, at least when it comes to the deities that are present here, I just kind of wanted to do something a little different that isn't another Creating a Champions video. So, you know, with all that being said, I'm kind of glad to how this turned out. I'm sorry that it's a little bit of a shorter video, but to be honest, most of the content that I've already talked about are present in my other videos, so I'm not really going to spam it here. But I did just want to make some clarifications about what types of, you know, deities are present and that I'm going to be present in these stories and whatnot. So with all that being said, I'm kind of glad to how it's kind of turning out. And it, you know, it's about 30 minutes now. So, you know, it's a nice, good, like half-hour video to where you could just sit and just kind of listen to me, you know, talk about these sort of creatures. And who knows, maybe I'll make a part 2 talking about the other aliens that are present in my universe. Oh, what do you mean, Afro? What do you mean that there's going to be other aliens? I thought there was only Jerians and Xerxians and elementals and Jury Rays. You know, you're meaning to tell me that there's other creatures present? Absolutely. In my mind is my oyster. This is my world, and there's so many things going on in there. And in fact, with these, you know, new aliens, I've already kind of mentioned them back in my other videos. You know, check out my Audacity video where I mentioned managers. So I'm going to be talking about the managers, and I also have another idea talking about these creatures known as dog catchers. So, you know, I'm not going to go over it here, but just kind of look out for next week's video. But with all that being said, everyone, I have been AfroMandias. Thank you all so much for watching. Stay fresh and stay frosty, Afrolytes, and I'll catch y'all next time.